We have a massive Leafs update to go over today as following what has been, as we know, a crazy 48 to 72 hours for this team. Keith Pelley has broken the silence and revealed that huge changes are incoming for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to break down exactly what he said and discuss what changes he is referring to, as well as a bunch of other updates ahead of what's going to be a crazy next few days, weeks, and months for this Toronto Maple Leafs team. But before we get into all that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your guys' support has been unbelievable. If you're part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Darius, ton to go over today. Keith Pelley, we had a live stream, one of our best live streams. Your guys' support's been unbelievable on that. But Keith Pelley came out and he said some interesting things. Now, he spoke a little bit on the player side, but that's really up to Brad Treliving. But we have some insight now as to what the Leafs master plan is and what's going to be going forward. And let's start with a couple things here, because there's a bunch of Leafs updates to go over, and a couple of them have fans a little bit, fired up if our stream is any indication. But let's start with this. So Keith Pelley came out and said, "I have my utmost confidence in Brad and Craig. I will not be looking to replace Brendan Shanahan," because obviously we know the truth has kind of come out surrounding Brendan Shanahan and why he was fired. And Keith Pelley was very vocal in this interview today in the press conference, specifically about being willing to make changes. And him in his first year now has let go of Brendan Shanahan. And it's very interesting. And he also spoke out, I'll get your thoughts in a second here, about the atmosphere and the amount of pressure, I use that word a lot, that he felt heading into Game 7 against the Florida Panthers, and how that alludes to the fact that what they did isn't good enough and that changes are coming. What those exact changes are on the personnel side will yet to be seen. But we know, and I didn't necessarily love everything he said, but he clearly gets that this Leafs team and these Leafs fans, us, everybody, wants change and demands change.
Yeah, absolutely. I liked a lot of what he said to open up the press conference, right? And obviously buttering up the fans and all of that. I can appreciate that stuff. But, I liked a lot of what he said to open the press conference, and that winning is all that matters here. And is it all that matters? Yeah, I think we're getting to that point. I think fans want a Stanley Cup, and that's the expectation and has always been the expectation. But of course, this team looks like it's closer than maybe the 2006 team, right? So obviously the expectation is there to win a Stanley Cup. So I like that he opened up with that type of stuff. But as the press conference went on, and I know and I can appreciate that he can't talk about the team and the specifics of the roster. That's for Brad Treliving. It wasn't there today. He will be speaking on that at some point, and I do want to hear from Brad Treliving. But a lot of the stuff was surface level. I don't think I really got a feel for how they're going to implement a plan moving forward, right? And how things will be different without a president. He also didn't really get into the specifics of why Brendan Shanahan was let go, because we all have an idea as to why he was let go. But there are a lot of different factors, and it looks like MLSE, with Rogers taking over majority ownership, is restructuring a little bit. So I wonder, I wonder if that played into it. It definitely did, but how much of it was that versus the fact that he didn't want to change? And we're going to get into it later in the video too, but that was another quote that, didn't really sit too well with me in terms of change is hard. And we all know that change is hard, and they want to bring a Stanley Cup to the Toronto Maple Leafs, but change is necessary, especially when things have been as stagnant as they have been with this core group of players. They crash and burn in disastrous fashion every single time in the same moment. So their inability to change, which fell on for the last 10 years to this point, Brendan Shanahan, was their downfall. So I didn't really get a sense as to how that will change. And he said that change is hard. I didn't really like that part, but again, I could appreciate a lot of the other stuff that was said.
Yeah, and Chris Johnson asked a pretty good question about what would be considered a success, what his expectations are, and he said we have to be on the pathway to winning the Stanley Cup. Not necessarily, crash and burn if they don't win the Stanley Cup next year, which is kind of how I'm feeling, but at the same time, be on a pathway there, get past the second round. And it's there were some positives there, but at the end of the day, a lot of the personnel questions, Mitch Marner, Matthew Knies, John Tavares, we'll have updates for you, but that's going to be, of course, on the Brad Treliving side, who we have an update on speaking soon as well. And regarding last season, he said, we made strides. Florida is a very good hockey team. We've seen that against Carolina this week, another very good hockey team. And of course, there's been a lot of discussion. You might even have a video on it about how, Florida is just walking. They are destroying the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think the Leafs would have done the same. And there's been a lot of discourse lately from fans and from other fans of other teams as well, how good the Leafs actually are, and has the horrible division structure screwed the Leafs in the past 10 years that ultimately led them. At the end of the day, you have to win regardless, and that's something that they didn't do. But there definitely is cases to be made about that. And Keith Pelley was kind of hinting at that as well. And I'm hoping the NHL does change that at some point. But as it pertains to making decisions on the trades, free agents, and draft picks, he said that he's just a sounding board for these things. And we're hoping we're going to hear from Brad Treliving very shortly here. But It's interesting. You mentioned, of course, the change and the pressure the team faces. He went on to say that pressure is a privilege. The greatest hockey team in the world is the Toronto Maple Leafs, and as a result, you see the passion and the tribalism. It was, if there's anything you can take away from this, is that he's not going to be afraid to make change for this team. And again, he's not going to be the guy who makes changes for Mitch Marner leaving and everything like that. But he said he spoke at dinner with, Craig Berube, I believe it was yesterday night, and all these different things. And I think it's clear now, based on all the reports we're hearing, all the little leaks we're hearing, that there is going to be monumental change in the players, whether that's Mitch Marner leaving, John Tavares, all these different things. And of course, Keith Pelley's not going to say that, but I think he's given them the green light to say, hey, make huge changes if you want to. And that's the good sign for us as Leafs fans.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like there is going to be change. And I mean, we can come up to that conclusion ourselves right now, too, because there probably is going to be with how many moving pieces that there is. And we don't know what's happening with John Tavares, for example, either. But one other thing that came out of this press conference that I thought was very interesting as well is because they don't have a president anymore, they're trying to streamline the communication aspect of the entire organization, which I think is a good thing. Playing broken telephones sometimes can, especially when you're waiting for approval on things, can be detrimental to the organization. But one thing I thought was interesting was Craig Berube will now have more of a say about what players they go out and get and those decisions than most NHL coaches do, which I think is interesting. I think it could be a good thing because obviously you want to be in alignment. To win the Stanley Cup, everybody has to be in alignment, from now the CEO, Keith Pelley, to Brad Treliving, to Craig Berube. Like the players that Brad Treliving is getting for Craig Berube, he's got to be able to use. So the fact that he's going to have more say about that and probably be involved more so in those decisions, which all coaches are, like to some degree, but he's going to be more involved, I think actually will be a good thing. And I think it was interesting that this came out of that. But again, there's a lot of saying the right things today, but they have to put that into action. Some of the stuff, and we don't have to get into it here, we got into it on the stream, that he said about TFC. This is obviously Leafs Digest, but about TFC, I thought was a little weird as well. So there was some troubling things in there, but yeah, a lot of it was saying the right things, but how do you execute on those things? That's the one thing that the Leafs haven't been able to do. Change when needed and execute. Whether it's on the ice, front office, whatever it is, they haven't been able to do it. So how are they going to be able to do that? I didn't really get a clear answer on that, but I am looking forward to when Brad Treliving speaks out, because that's the next step. What's happening with this roster? What did he see this season? What was the downfall of the team? And like you mentioned quickly before I wrap up, the division. Yeah, it's hard, but if you want to win the Stanley Cup, you got to beat the best teams. It doesn't matter. So you were not good enough. We saw it, to beat the Florida Panthers. You laid an egg in 2 of those games, and that's pretty unacceptable. I think the fan base would have been okay if you tried every single game, you were in every single game, and you lost. I think the fan base would have been at least a little bit more accepting of certain things, but that's not what happened, and it hasn't happened the whole time.
Yeah, and they're clearing house, or they're hoping to at least. I mean, again, they have like 120. They have way too many, I think, voices in this Leafs team with all the different coaching staff. It's a very similar problem with the Toronto Blue Jays that they've, of course, fixed as well, so are working towards fixing. But at the end of the day, Keith Pelley was a sounding board, and now we're waiting to hear from Brad Treliving, who was at his daughter's graduation today, so couldn't be there, which is full, congratulations to his daughter, and obviously that makes total sense. But they're set to meet on Sunday, Keith Pelley and Brad Treliving, and he's already met with Berube, and we're hoping now that means that early next week we're going to be having a press conference and interview with Brad Treliving. And of course, if that happens, we'll be covering it live. A couple other things quickly before we wrap up. Of course, John Tavares, he's an absolute baller, all these different things. There's been some rumblings about Matt Sundin getting a new role with the Leafs organization, and feel free to pause here regarding some things. We know why Brandon Shanahan, he left as well, but this is very interesting, Darius, and we'll cover it again in a future video. But the big piece of news here, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces with the player side of things, with the front office, but we know now what's clear is that Brad Treliving is going to be the #1 guy. So if you dislike him, this is bad news, but I think he's done a very solid job, and Berube and Treliving are the 2 guys that are going to be making the biggest strides. Let us know down below what your guys' thoughts are. Thank you guys for watching. We'll have more videos coming your way soon. See you guys later.